The Omega slave knocked his cup down. The Alpha King realized she'd saved his life. Don't move. Don't speak. Don't even breathe where he can hear you. The whisper clawed through Serena's mind, like a desperate animal seeking shelter, repeating in rhythm with the violent hammering of her heart against her ribs. The wooden tray in her scarred hands trembled. The silver goblets perched atop it, threatening to sing their betrayal. Each quiet clink a scream in the suffocating silence of her terror. The great hall of Blackmore Vale was not a dining room. It was an arena draped in silk banners and torchlight, where predators wore noble titles and sharpened their teeth on the bones of the powerless. The air itself felt carnivorous, thick with the scent of roasted venison, expensive wine from distant vineyards, and beneath it all, the metallic promise of violence held on a leash. At the head of the ancient oak table sat Hilary Castillo, the Alpha King, a man whose very name was etched into the kingdom's flesh like a brand. He wasn't laughing, he never laughed, but his dark eyes swept the room with the patience of a wolf who knew the hunt always ended in his favor. To his left, Lord Arvane Hollowcrest smiled, his expression smooth as polished glass, his fingers hovering over the king's cup with the delicate precision of a spider spinning a web. Serena saw the powder fall, white as bone dust, fine as ash. It disappeared into the crimson wine like a secret dissolving into blood. Time fractured. The world slowed to the pace of a dying heartbeat. If I speak, I am executed for accusation. If he drinks, the kingdom fractures into war. In the span of a single breath, amidst the thunder of nobles raising their goblets in a toast to victories built on the backs of the broken, Serena moved, not as a slave, but as a ghost slipping between the cracks of fate. Her rough, calloused fingers brushed the king's hand, cold, terrifying, absolute, and she knocked the goblet from the table. The silver cup hit stone. Wine exploded across the floor like spilled blood. Silence fell. Absolute. Suffocating. Deadly. Hilary Castillo did not look at the shattered cup. He looked at her. Before we continue, please hit the subscribe and like button and tell me which city you're tuning in from. I love to know where this story found you. Now let's dive in. The hierarchy of Blackmore Vale was not tradition. It was law carved into flesh and enforced with iron. Alphas ruled with fists that shattered bones and voices that bent wills. Betas enforced with ruthless efficiency, their loyalty purchased with power. Omegas endured winters they were never meant to survive. And slaves had no names, only functions, only branded flesh and bowed heads, and the constant gnawing knowledge that their lives could end with a single word from someone who mattered. Serena Clements had learned the art of invisibility by erasing everything that made her human. She was a shadow in a torn gray dress, a forgotten daughter of a healer who'd taught her to recognize death by scent before the kingdom sold her to pay a debt that was never hers. She scrubbed floors until her knees bled, poured wine until her arms screamed, and kept her eyes down because meeting a noble's gaze was an invitation to punishment. Tonight was the victory banquet, the most dangerous night of the year, than when power gathered to celebrate itself and the vulnerable simply tried not to be noticed. The great hall was a cathedral of wealth and violence. Massive chandeliers of black iron and dripping crystal cast fractured light over the gathered lords and ladies, their faces beautiful and cruel in equal measure. Every shadow seemed to hide a blade. Every whisper felt like a conspiracy taking shape. Serena kept her head bowed, her gaze locked on the polished stone floor that reflected the distorted shapes of the feast above, a world she would never belong to, populated by people who would never see her as anything but property. She moved like a breeze, unnoticed, unwanted. More wine, girl. Are you blind as well as worthless? The voice cracked like a whip. Mistress Virelda Moore, the slave ward's keeper, and dug her bony fingers into the soft flesh of Serena's arm, her breath hot and sour. The king's cup is... She stopped. Her eyes went wide. Because Hilary Castillo was standing now, rising slowly from his throne-like chair, every guard in the hall tensing like bowstrings pulled taut. And the trembling Omega slave stood at his feet, wine soaking into the hem of her dress, her breath coming in shallow gasps. The Alpha King's voice cut through the silence like a blade through silk. Why? The word hung in the air like an executioner's blade. Why? Serena's lips parted, but no sound emerged. Her throat had closed around the answer, strangling it before it could become a death sentence. Seize her. The command came not from the king, but from Lord Hollowcrest, his smooth voice now edged with something sharp and desperate. The slave has assaulted his majesty. She must be... 2 guards moved like lightning. Iron fingers clamped around Serena's arms, wrenching her backward with enough force to send pain shooting through her shoulders. Her knees buckled, but they dragged her upright, her bare feet scraping against stone. Laughter rippled through the hall. Cold, cruel, delighted. Did you see that? Clumsy wretch. She'll lose more than her hands for touching the king. Punishment chambers are too kind. I'd suggest... Serena's vision blurred. Her brand burned beneath her collar, as though the iron had been pressed to her flesh all over again. This was how it ended. This was how she died. Not from the courage of speaking truth, but from the instinct that had moved her hand before thought could stop it. The guards hauled her toward the side entrance, toward the stone stairs that led down into the bowels of the keep, where screams were swallowed by thick walls, and mercy was a word without meaning. Stop! The single word cracked through the hall like thunder. The guards froze mid-step. Every noble fell silent. Hilary Castillo had not raised his voice. He didn't need to. Authority rolled off him in waves, primal and absolute, the kind of power that didn't ask. It commanded, and the world obeyed or shattered. He descended from the dais with the unhurried grace of a predator who knew the prey had nowhere to run. His boots echoed against stone, each step a declaration. When he stopped before her, Serena felt the weight of his presence like a physical thing pressing down on her chest, stealing what little air remained in her lungs. Bring her to my study. Your Majesty. Lord Hollowcrest's protest died as the king's gaze cut toward him, cold and lethal. Now. The study was a fortress of dark wood and leather-bound silence. Serena stood in the center of the room, her arms still aching from the guard's grip, her legs trembling so violently she feared they would give out. The door closed behind the king, with a sound like a coffin sealing shut. She expected pain. Instead, he circled her slowly, a wolf assessing wounded prey. You knocked my cup down, he said quietly, his tone unreadable. Slaves are beaten for far less, executed for touching a king without permission. Yet you did both. Serena's voice emerged as barely a whisper. Look at me. The command was gentle, but it was still a command. She raised her head, forcing her eyes to meet his. Dark, calculating, impossibly sharp. He studied her the way a scholar studied ancient texts, searching for hidden meaning in every line. Why? He asked again. The truth tasted like ash on her tongue. It smelled wrong, my king. Silence stretched between them, like a blade being drawn slowly from its sheath. Then, impossibly, he moved toward the spilled wine still staining the stones beyond his study window. A guard had brought the fallen cup, and Hilary lifted it now, bringing the silver rim to his nose. His expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or fury held on a vicious leash. He set the cup down with deliberate care. "What did you smell?" "Silverthorn root, crushed moonleaf." Her voice steadied, muscle memory from a life before chains taking over. "My mother was a healer. She taught me to recognize poisons before." She stopped. "Before they sold me. Before I became property." Hilary was silent for a long moment, his jaw tight. Then he did something that shattered every expectation Serena had carried into this room. He dismissed the guards. The door closed. They were alone. He poured water from a crystal pitcher into a clean cup, his own hands performing the task, not hers, and held it out. "Drink." Serena stared at the offering as though it were an illusion. Slaves drank from buckets, from their cupped palms when no one was watching. Never from crystal, never from a king's hand. "I won't ask again." She reached for the cup with shaking fingers. Their hands brushed, his warm, solid, real, and she flinched so violently that water sloshed over the rim. He noticed. Of course he noticed. This man who missed nothing, who ruled through observation and ruthless perception, whose eyes tracked the slight widening of her pupils, the way her breath caught, the protective curl of her shoulders. She drank. The water was cold, clean, safe. It tasted like a mercy she didn't deserve. When she finished, he took the cup back and set it aside. "You will taste my food and drink before every meal," he said, his tone brooking no argument. "You will stay within the inner keep. You will report anything that smells wrong to you." Serena's mind reeled. "My king, You're my cupbearer now." He moved toward his desk, already shifting his attention to maps and sealed letters, dismissing her from his focus, the way one might dismiss a piece moved into position on a game board. "You'll be assigned quarters. Guards will escort you." She should have felt relief. Instead, she felt the weight of a target being painted across her back. "One more thing." He didn't look up. "If you're lying to me, if this was some conspiracy to gain my trust, I will know, and you will wish I'd let them take you to the punishment chambers." The threat was spoken softly. It was no less devastating for its gentleness. "I understand, my king." "Then go." Serena turned toward the door on unsteady legs, her heart still thundering against her ribs. She had saved the Alpha King's life. And now, somehow, her survival depended on staying close enough to do it again. 3 days passed like a knife dragged slowly across skin. Serena tasted everything that touched the Alpha King's table. Every morning she stood beside his chair in the private dining chamber, her fingers steady despite the tremor that lived permanently in her chest now. She lifted each piece of bread to her lips, sipped wine from his cup, sampled roasted meats and honeyed fruits, while nobles watched through the doorway, with expressions that ranged from curiosity to contempt. The whispers had already begun. Why does he keep her so close? A slave, at the king's table. It's unseemly. Perhaps she's more than a cupbearer, if you catch my meaning. The insinuations slithered through the halls like poison in wine, and Serena felt them even when she couldn't hear the words. She saw it in the way Lady Mirren's lip curled when Serena passed, in the deliberate shoulder check from a passing beta guard, in Mistress Virelda's cold fury every time their paths crossed. But Hilary said nothing about the rumors. He simply watched. And watching, Serena was learning, was what the Alpha King did best. He noticed everything. The way she always ate last, only after he'd finished, taking the smallest portions from what remained as though afraid someone would accuse her of theft. The way she positioned herself with her back to corners, never blocking exits, always aware of who entered and left the room. The way she flinched, small, almost imperceptible, whenever anyone moved too quickly near her. On the fourth day, during the afternoon meal, he shifted his chair. The movement was subtle, angling himself so that his body created a barrier between her and the council members who'd gathered to discuss border disputes. She didn't realize what he'd done until Lord Karvesh reached across the table, and she didn't flinch, because Hillary was between them. She glanced up, startled, and found him already looking away, his attention seemingly fixed on the reports before him. But she'd seen the calculation in his eyes. He'd done it on purpose. The nightmares came on the seventh night. Serena had been given quarters in the servants' wing of the inner keep, a small room with a real bed, a luxury that felt like mockery when she couldn't sleep without seeing her mother's face. The healer woman who'd taught her daughter to identify belladonna by scent, to know death before it arrived. The same woman who'd died because she couldn't heal the sickness that had rotted their family from within, leaving only debts and a child to be sold. Serena woke gasping, her throat closed around a scream she'd learned long ago never to release. The nightmare clung to her like grave dirt, visions of cups she couldn't reach. Oh, poison! She couldn't stop, the Alpha King's body crumpling while she stood frozen, useless, failing. "You're awake." The voice nearly stopped her heart. Hillary stood in her doorway, fully dressed despite the late hour, his expression unreadable in the dim light from the hall sconces. 2 guards flanked him, but he waved them back with a gesture. "I heard..." He paused, reconsidering. "I was walking the halls." A lie. The Alpha King didn't patrol the servants' wing. Serena scrambled upright, her bare feet hitting cold stone, her thin sleeping shift suddenly feeling like far too little fabric between herself and scrutiny. "Forgive me, my king. I didn't mean to disturb." "What did you dream?" The question landed like a blade between ribs, unexpected, too precise, cutting straight to the wound. Her voice emerged as a whisper. "I dreamed I forgot." "Forgot what?" "How to smell danger." The confession spilled out before she could stop it, pulled forth by exhaustion and fear, and the strange, terrifying gentleness in his tone. "I dreamed the poison was there and I didn't notice. I dreamed I failed you, and the kingdom." Her breath hitched. "I dreamed everything burned because I wasn't enough." Silence filled the small room, like water rising. When Hillary finally spoke, his voice was quieter than she'd ever heard it. "You're not afraid of pain." It wasn't a question. "No, my king." "You're afraid of failing me." Serena's throat closed. She nodded, unable to meet his eyes. Something shifted in the air between them, subtle as a lock clicking open, dangerous as a door swinging wide. "You saved my life," he said slowly, as though testing each word's weight. "Not for reward, not for freedom. You saved me because your instinct wouldn't let you do anything else." She didn't deny it. Couldn't. He studied her for a long moment, and she felt the weight of that gaze like sunlight after years in darkness. Warm, exposing, impossible to hide from. "You should sleep," he said finally. "Tomorrow's council meeting will run long. I'll need you alert." He turned to leave. "My king." He paused, glancing back. "Why do you..." She stopped, the question too dangerous to finish. "Why do you position yourself between me and others? Why do you notice when I flinch? Why do you care if a slave has nightmares?" "Rest, Serena." Her name. He'd used her name. The door closed softly behind him, and Serena sat in the darkness, her heart doing something strange and terrifying in her chest. The Alpha King who never smiled, who ruled through fear and ruthless calculation, who listened when she whispered her fears in the dark. And she realized, with a jolt of pure terror, that somewhere in the space between poison and protection, between duty and instinct, something had begun to grow. Something neither of them had given permission for. Something that felt dangerously like trust. The summons came during the morning meal, delivered by a guard whose expression promised nothing good. "The council requests an audience, Your Majesty, regarding the slave." Hilary's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He set down his cup, the one Serena had already tested, and met her eyes across the table. "Wait in the antechamber." It wasn't a suggestion. Serena pressed her ear to the heavy oak door, her heart a drumbeat of dread. Mistress Virelda's voice cut through first, sharp as broken glass. "The girl belongs to the slave ward, Your Majesty. Her extended absence disrupts order and sets a dangerous precedent." "Dangerous?" Hilary's tone was deceptively calm. "Explain." Lord Hollowcrest took over, his words measured, poisonous. "The Omega has been seen at your side constantly. Alone with you, the court whispers of impropriety, of manipulation. You believe a slave is manipulating me?" The temperature in the room seemed to drop. "We believe," Lady Mirren interjected smoothly, "that you are a man of honor being exploited by a creature trained in deception. She claims to have saved you, yet there's no proof the wine was poisoned. Perhaps she staged the entire incident to gain your favor." Silence. Then Hilary's voice, cold as winter stone. "The wine was tested after the incident. On Silverthorn and Moonleaf were confirmed by 3 separate apothecaries. Would you like to see their reports, or shall I have you drink what remained?" No one answered. "Serena Clements stays where I place her. This council is dismissed." "Your Majesty!" Virelda's protest died as a door slammed. Serena stumbled back from the antechamber entrance, her blood roaring in her ears. He'd defended her. He'd used her name. But the hatred in those council voices lingered like smoke, and she knew with cold certainty they would not stop. They would not forgive. And she, a slave who dared rise above her station, had just become a target. The attack came 3 nights later. Serena was returning from the kitchens, carrying the sealed wine she'd personally watched the cellar master pour, when she heard voices echoing from the king's private corridor. "Yos inside the east study. He'll be alone reviewing maps until midnight. And the girl? Dispose of her after. Make it look like she was the assassin. Perfect scapegoat." Ice flooded Serena's veins. She dropped the wine. Glass shattered. She ran. Her bare feet slapped against stone as she tore through corridors, her lungs burning. The guards at Hilary's door moved to stop her, but she screamed, "Assassins! Inside!" And they crashed through the entrance. The study exploded into chaos. 3 figures in dark leather moved like shadows. Steel flashed in candlelight. Hilary was already fighting, his blade a silver arc of lethal precision. But there were too many, too fast. One slipped past his guard. Serena saw the dagger angling toward his exposed ribs, saw the killing blow descending, and her body moved before thought could intervene. She threw herself forward. The blade meant for a king's heart buried itself in a slave's shoulder instead. Pain detonated through her, white-hot and absolute. She heard someone screaming, realized distantly it was her. And then the world tilted. Hilary's roar shattered the air. She'd never heard that sound from him before, primal, furious, broken. He moved like a storm given flesh, and the assassins died quickly, brutally, without mercy. When silence finally fell, he was on his knees beside her, his hands pressed against her bleeding shoulder, his face a mask of controlled devastation. "You fool," he growled, his voice raw. "You stupid, reckless. You're alive," she gasped. His eyes met hers, and something cracked in that iron control. "Healers," he bellowed, "now!" They worked on her in his private chambers. Hilary refused to leave. He stood at the window, his back rigid, his hands clenched into fists as the head healer stitched Serena's torn flesh. Every whimper she couldn't quite suppress made his shoulders tense further. When it was done, when the healers finally left, he approached the bed where she lay pale and trembling. "Why?" The question emerged hoarse. Serena's laugh was weak, pained. "You keep asking me that, because I keep failing to understand." He sat on the edge of the bed, an intimacy that would scandalize the court, that shattered every rule of hierarchy and propriety. "You could have died. So could you." His hand moved almost of its own accord, brushing a strand of damp hair from her forehead. She didn't flinch this time. Couldn't flinch, perhaps, or didn't want to. "This wasn't random," he said quietly, his fingers still hovering near her face. "The poisoning, the council's sudden push to remove you, this attack. Someone is orchestrating this." "Lord Hollowcrest," Serena whispered. "I know." His jaw clenched. "I've known since you knocked my cup down. I've been gathering evidence, waiting for him to make a mistake large enough to move against him without fracturing the council. And now?" His eyes were dark, dangerous. Now, he's crossed a line he can't uncross. The room fell quiet, except for the crackle of the hearth. Hilary's hand still rested near her face, close enough that she could feel its warmth. "You protect me," he said, wonder threading through the words, "even though I've given you no reason to trust me. Even though my kingdom made you a slave. Why?" Serena met his gaze, too exhausted for lies, too wounded for walls. "Because you see me," she whispered, "and I see you." The truth hung between them, dangerous, forbidden, undeniable. Hilary's thumb brushed her cheek, feather-light. This was no longer about poison. This was war, and they were both already bleeding. Serena woke to sunlight streaming through windows too grand to belong to a slave's quarters. For a disoriented moment, she forgot where she was, forgot the blade, the blood, the way Hilary's voice had broken when he'd called her a fool. Then pain lanced through her shoulder, and memory crashed back with brutal clarity. She was in the king's chambers, still. 3 days had passed since the attack. 3 days of healers changing bandages while Hilary worked at his desk, refusing to leave her unguarded. 3 days of existing in a space between worlds, too valuable to be property, too powerless to be anything else. "Ark, you're awake." His voice drew her gaze to the chair beside the bed, where he sat with dark circles beneath his eyes and reports scattered across his lap. "You should rest, my king," she said quietly. "So should you. Yet here we are." He set the papers aside, studying her with that unnerving intensity. "The healer says you're recovering well. The wound was clean." "Thanks to your healers." She hesitated. I don't deserve this care." "Stop." The command was gentle, but absolute. "You took a blade meant for me. You deserve far more than I can give you." The words settled between them, heavy with meaning neither dared examine too closely. Serena's throat tightened. "I'm sorry If you apologize for saving my life again, I'm moving you back to the servants' wing." Despite everything, her lips twitched. Almost a smile. "Jan, you wouldn't." Try me." This time she did smile, small and fragile as new ice. Hilary's expression softened in a way she'd never seen before, like walls crumbling, revealing something raw and unguarded beneath. "I was betrayed once," he said abruptly, his gaze drifting to the window, "by someone I trusted more than my own blood. My former beta, Castellan Vorel. He was my closest advisor, my friend. I believed he would die for this kingdom." Serena waited, afraid to breathe, afraid to break whatever spell had loosened his tongue. "He nearly succeeded in poisoning me 2 years ago. Used a serving girl as his instrument, told her it was medicine for my headaches. She had no idea she was being used." His voice went flat. "I executed her before I learned the truth. By the time I discovered Vorel's betrayal, he'd fled beyond the border." Horror coiled in Serena's chest. "The girl was innocent, and I killed her for it." He finally looked at her, his eyes haunted. "That's why I never eat or drink anything untested. Why I trust no one. Why I rule through fear instead of faith." He paused. "Until you." The confession struck like lightning. "I don't understand," Serena whispered. "Neither do I." His hand moved toward hers on the blanket, then stopped, hovering in the space between them. "You should hate me. This kingdom enslaved you. I uphold the laws that keep you in chains, yet you protect me." "And you protect me," she countered softly. "Even though it weakens your position, even though the council despises me." Their eyes met, and the air itself seemed to hold its breath. Hilary's fingers finally closed over hers, warm, solid, deliberate. "I'm beginning to think," he said slowly, "that weakness and strength aren't what I believed them to be." The council meeting 2 days later was a viper's nest. Serena stood behind Hilary's chair, her shoulder still bandaged beneath her dress, and tried to make herself invisible. But invisibility was no longer possible, not when every lord and lady tracked her movement with predatory focus. Lord Hollowcrest sat 3 seats down, his expression pleasant, his scent sour with suppressed anxiety. Fear, Serena realized. He reeked of it. "Your Majesty," Lady Mirren began, her tone syrup-sweet, "we must address the incident. 3 assassins breached the inner keep. Someone provided them access." "I agree." Hilary's voice was dangerously calm. "I've been investigating." "And?" Lord Carvesh leaned forward. "What have you found?" "That the conspiracy runs deeper than a few hired blades." He gestured, and a guard brought forth a sealed chest. Letters, payment records, correspondence detailing plans to destabilize the throne. Hollowcrest's heartbeat spiked. Serena could smell the surge of adrenaline, sharp as copper. "Fascinating," Hollowcrest said smoothly. "And the source?" "Still being traced." Hilary's gaze swept the table. "But the handwriting has been analyzed. The truth will emerge." "Perhaps," Verelda interjected coldly, "we should examine who benefits most from your Majesty's distraction. The slave girl appears during an alleged poisoning. Conveniently saves you. Remains at your side, constantly. Then assassins attack, and she heroically takes a blade." "Are you suggesting she orchestrated her own stabbing?" Hilary's voice could have frozen fire. "I'm suggesting," Verelda said carefully, "that a clever slave might sacrifice her own flesh to secure a king's favor, and that perhaps she's been working with conspirators all along, playing both sides." Serena's blood turned to ice. They were framing her. The evidence, the narrative, the timing, all of it designed to paint her as the true threat, while Hollowcrest slipped away clean. Her hands trembled. She smelled desperation now, thick as smoke, coming from multiple directions. The conspiracy was cornered, and cornered predators were the most dangerous. Hilary stood slowly and the room fell silent. Serena Clements will not be questioned, accused, or removed from my protection. Anyone who attempts otherwise will face me directly. His gaze locked on Hollowcrest. And I promise you, I am far less forgiving than the courts. The threat landed like an axe. The meeting ended in tense silence. That night, alone in his study, Hilary finally spoke what neither had dared voice. "If I claimed you," he said quietly, not looking at her, "if I acknowledged what's growing between us, they would call it proof of your manipulation. They would use it to justify your execution." Serena's heart cracked. "I know. And if I don't," his voice roughened, "if I keep you close but unclaimed, you remain vulnerable. A slave. Property that can be taken, hurt, destroyed to strike at me." "I know that too." He turned finally, his expression devastated. "There's no safe path." "No," she agreed. "There isn't." The bond between them trembled, real, powerful, impossible. Neither reached for the other, but neither looked away. The throne hall had never felt so much like a tomb. Serena knelt on cold stone, her wrists bound in iron, her shoulder still tender beneath hastily mended cloth. Around her, the gathered nobility formed a circle of judgment, their faces masks of righteous condemnation, their whispers a chorus of anticipated violence. Above them all, Hilary sat rigid on the obsidian throne, his knuckles white against the armrests. Lord Hollowcrest stood before the assembly, his voice ringing with false sorrow. "Your Majesty, lords and ladies of Blackmoor Vale, we gather today not in celebration, but in necessity. The slave Serena has been charged with seduction of the crown, manipulation of the king's favor, and conspiracy to commit treason." "Treason?" Hilary's voice was deadly quiet. "Explain." Lady Murren stepped forward, holding parchment like a weapon. "She orchestrated the initial poisoning herself, then saved you to gain trust. The recent assassination attempt was theater, a blade to her own shoulder to cement her position. She's been working with conspirators to destabilize your rule from within." "That's a lie." Hilary rose and power rolled off him in waves. "I have evidence." "You have infatuation," Lord Carvesh interrupted. "We all see it, Your Majesty. The girl has bewitched you." "Bewitched?" Hilary's laugh was razor-sharp. "By what? Her trembling? Her silence? Her willingness to bleed for a kingdom that branded her flesh and stole her name?" "By her cunning," Virelda hissed. "Omegas are trained from birth to manipulate through submission. She plays the victim while you dance to her tune." The council murmured agreement, a rising tide of condemnation. Serena's throat closed. They'd prepared for this, built a case so airtight that even truth couldn't penetrate it. Her life had been weighed and found worthless, and nothing Hilary said would change the calculus. Unless she removed herself from the equation. "Stop." Her voice cut through the noise, small but clear. Every eye turned to her. She lifted her head, meeting Hilary's gaze across the hall. Saw the warning there, the desperate plea for her to stay silent. She ignored it. "I offer myself for judgment," she said. "If my death will end this conspiracy, if it will restore faith in the king's rule, then take it. I only ask one thing." "You ask nothing," Virelda spat. "You are property." "I ask," Serena continued, her voice steady now, "that you investigate Lord Hollowcrest's correspondence before you execute me. That you examine his financial records, that you ask why he smells like fear every time the king speaks of evidence. Hollowcrest's pleasant mask finally cracked. The slave makes wild accusations to save herself. Then prove me wrong, Serena challenged. Let the king's investigators examine your holdings. If I'm lying, my death will be sweeter for it. If I'm not— Enough! Hollowcrest's hand moved toward his belt. Everything happened at once. Steel flashed as Hollowcrest drew a hidden blade. Guards surged forward, but not toward him, toward the doors, where armed figures in rebel colors were suddenly pouring into the hall. "Seize the king!" Hollowcrest roared, his mask of civility shattered completely. "The Omega dies first!" Chaos erupted. Hillary was moving before thought, his sword clearing its sheath as he leapt from the throne. He cut through the nearest rebel, then another, fighting toward Serena with single-minded fury. A blade descended toward her exposed neck. She rolled, chains rattling, and the stone where her head had been cracked and splintered. Her bound hands were useless, her shoulder screaming, but she kicked out hard, catching her attacker's knee. Then Hillary was there, a storm of lethal precision, cutting her bonds with one strike and pulling her behind him in the next breath. "How many?" he growled. "Too many." Serena's eyes scanned the chaos. Guards fighting rebels, nobles fleeing, blood spreading across pristine floors. "We need to leave, now." "The exits are blocked. Not all of them." She grabbed his hand, her smaller fingers lacing through his. "Trust me." For a heartbeat he hesitated. Then he nodded. Serena led him through the melee, ducking behind toppled chairs and overturned tables, until they reached the eastern wall. Her fingers found the nearly invisible seam in the stone. A servant's passage, too small for nobles to notice, built for slaves to move unseen. "Here." She pressed the release. The panel swung inward, revealing darkness. "You first," Hillary commanded. "Together," she countered. They plunged into the narrow passage side by side, the sounds of battle fading behind them. The corridor was barely wide enough for Hillary's shoulders, pitch black and suffocating. But Serena knew these paths. She'd scrubbed them, bled in them, and learned their secrets during years of invisibility. "Stay close," she whispered, pulling him deeper into the darkness. His hand tightened around hers. "I'm not letting go." They ran through the veins of the keep, passages that slaves used to move between kitchens and chambers, spaces where the powerless became ghosts. Now those same passages carried a king and the woman who'd saved him. Partners. Finally. Behind them in the throne hall, Lord Hollowcrest screamed orders to find them. Ahead, in the darkness, Serena led Hillary toward survival, and toward a reckoning that would reshape the kingdom. "Where does this lead?" he asked. "Everywhere," she replied. "We built this place with our hands and blood. We know it better than any lord." He was silent for a moment, then, "We?" "Slaves. The invisible, some the ones you never saw." Her voice held no accusation, only truth. "We see everything." Another beat of silence. Then quietly, "Teach me." And in that moment, fleeing through passages built by broken hands, something fundamental shifted. Not king and slave, not protector and protected, but equals, bound by choice. The revolution had begun. The passages brought them to the lower armory, where loyal guards were regrouping. Commander Thane's face flooded with relief when he saw Hillary emerge from the wall. "Your Majesty, the rebels have taken the throne hall. Hollowcrest declared you dead, and himself regent. He's mobilizing the northern battalions. Hillary finished grimly. He's been planning this for months. Longer, Serena said quietly. All eyes turned to her. She straightened despite the pain in her shoulder, despite being the only slave in a room full of soldiers. I've smelled his plotting in every council meeting, fear and ambition rotting together. He poisoned your wine the night of the banquet. He hired the assassins. He framed me to isolate you. The evidence? Thane asked. In his private study, Hillary said. Letters, payment records, correspondence with rogue packs beyond the border. Enough to execute him 10 times over. Then we take the keep back, Thane said. How many men does he have? 40 rebels inside. But he's also poisoned strategic positions. Serena stepped forward, and Hillary noticed the shift. She wasn't cowering anymore. She was thinking, calculating. The east corridor has silverthorn in the ventilation. I smelled it when we passed. The main stairwell has been rigged with... She paused, inhaling deeply. A moonleaf powder. Anyone charging up those stairs will be paralyzed within seconds. Every soldier stared. How do you know this? Thane demanded. Because I know what death smells like, Serena replied simply. And this keep reeks of it. Hillary felt something fierce and proud unfurl in his chest. Can you guide us safely? She met his eyes. Yes. Then you have command of our movement. Thane, you and your men follow her directions exactly. The commander's jaw tightened, but he nodded. As you command. They moved through the keep like smoke. 20 guards, a king, and the slave who knew every secret the stones held. Serena led them around poison traps, through passages that bypassed rebel checkpoints, her nose reading the air like other people read maps. Twice, she stopped them before they walked into ambushes, the scent of unwashed bodies and cheap steel giving enemies away. There, she whispered, pointing to a grate. 4 men, waiting in the gallery above. Thane signaled. His archers fired through the grate. Bodies fell. They were halfway to the throne hall when Serena stopped cold, her face going pale. What? Hillary began. Run. Her voice cracked with terror. Run! The explosion tore through the eastern corridor behind them, flames erupting, stone cracking, the entire passage collapsing in a roar of destruction. If they'd been 5 seconds slower, they'd all be dead. Hillary grabbed Serena's arm, pulling her against him as debris rained down. You saved us. Again. Her eyes were wide, shocked. I smelled the oil, the wick burning. And you reacted. He cupped her face, forcing her to meet his gaze. You are not a slave, Serena Clements. You never were. Before she could respond, shouts echoed ahead. The throne hall doors. The final battle was brutal and swift. Hillary fought like a king who'd spent years restraining his fury, and finally let it loose. His blade sang through rebel lines, and his guards rallied around him with renewed ferocity. Hollowcrest stood at the throne, his sword drawn, his face twisted with rage. You should have died, he screamed. This kingdom needs a strong ruler, not a tyrant haunted by ghosts. Funny, Hillary said coldly, advancing. I was thinking the same about you. Their blades met with a crash of steel. Serena saw the dagger too late. A rebel breaking from the melee, weapon raised, aimed at Hillary's exposed back. She didn't think, didn't hesitate. She threw herself between them for the second time, and the world narrowed to the choice, him or me. There was no question which mattered more. The blade never reached her. Hillary spun, impossibly fast, and his sword took the rebel through the chest. Then he was pulling Serena behind him, shielding her with his body, his breathing ragged. Stop, he growled. Stop protecting me. Can't, she gasped. Won't. Something in him broke. He killed Hollowcrest with 3 brutal strikes. Efficient, merciless, final. The Lord's body crumpled at the foot of the throne he'd tried to steal. Silence fell. Surviving rebels dropped their weapons. Guards surrounded them. And Hilary turned to Serena, his hands shaking as he reached for her. Kneel, he said softly. Her heart stopped. My king, please. She knelt, confusion and fear warring in her chest, and his fingers found the iron collar at her throat, the brand of her slavery, the mark of her powerlessness. He gripped it with both hands and broke it. The metal shrieked, then shattered, pieces clattering to blood-stained stone. The entire hall went silent. Serena Clements, Hilary said, his voice carrying to every corner, is under my protection, not as property, not as servant. He pulled her to her feet, his hands gentle on her shoulders. As my chosen, as my equal, as the woman who saved this kingdom more times than I can count. Gasps rippled through the survivors. Your Majesty, Thane said carefully. The law. The law, Hilary interrupted, his eyes never leaving Serena's, begins and ends with me. And I say she is free. I say she is honored. I say anyone who harms her answers to me with their life. Tears tracked down Serena's face. You don't have to do this, she whispered. I know. His thumb brushed her cheek. I want to. Around them, slowly, one by one, the guards knelt. Not to the king, to them both. The conspiracy was broken. The kingdom was saved. And the slave who'd knocked a cup down had somehow become the woman who stood beside a king. The purge came swiftly. Lord Hollowcrest's body was displayed in the courtyard for 3 days. A warning to any who thought treason would go unanswered. His co-conspirators faced trial in the throne hall, their guilt documented in ledgers and letters written in their own hands. Lady Myrenne fled before she could be arrested. Lord Carvesh confessed everything in exchange for exile, instead of execution. Mistress Virelda Moore was stripped of her position and sent to work the fields she'd once forced slaves to tend. The council that remained was decimated, humbled, terrified. And into that fear, Hilary planted something new. Slavery, he declared before the assembled court, his voice ringing with iron certainty, ends today. Not tomorrow, not gradually, today. The remaining nobles erupted in protest. Your Majesty, the economy will adapt, Hilary cut through the objection. As will you. Every person currently held as property is hereby freed. They will be compensated for their labor. They will be given choice. His gaze swept the hall, daring anyone to challenge him. This kingdom was built on their backs, while we pretended not to see them. That ends now. Silence fell, thick and stunned. Furthermore, he continued, a new council will be formed, one that includes representatives from every station, not just nobility. If we rule these people, they deserve a voice in that rule. This is madness, someone whispered. No, Serena said quietly, stepping forward to stand beside him. This is justice. Every eye turned to her, the former slave who now stood at the king's right hand, her collar gone, her shoulders straight, her voice clear. I know what it means to be invisible, she said. To scrub floors until your hands bleed and still be told you're worthless. To have a name and lose it. To be property instead of human. She looked at the nobles, unflinching. You benefited from that system. Now you'll help build something better. Or you'll leave. The choice was clear. Most stayed. Some didn't. The kingdom began to change. 2 weeks later, in the quiet of his private study, Hilary stood at the window and watched the courtyard below. Former slaves were receiving papers, documents declaring their freedom, their names restored, their futures returned. Some wept. Others stood in shocked silence, as though afraid the dream would shatter. "You're troubled," Serena said softly from the doorway. He didn't turn. "I upheld that system for years, enforced those laws, benefited from their suffering while telling myself it was tradition, necessary, the way things had always been." She crossed the room, her footsteps soundless on stone. "You didn't create slavery." "No, but I perpetuated it." His voice was rough with self-recrimination. "How many died in chains because I was too afraid to change what I'd inherited? How many Serenas were sold, branded, I'm broken, while I sat on my throne and did nothing? You're doing something now. Too late for so many." "Yes," she agreed, and he finally looked at her. She met his gaze without flinching. "It is too late. You can't save the ones who came before. You can't undo what was done, but you can make sure it never happens again. That's not redemption. It's responsibility." He was quiet for a long moment. "You should hate me." "I know." A small smile touched her lips. "I tried. It would be easier." "Why don't you?" "Because I see who you are now, not just who you were, and I see you trying to be better." She stepped closer. "That matters." His hand reached for hers, hesitant, giving her every opportunity to pull away. She didn't. Their fingers laced together, and the touch felt like coming home. "I want to do this right," he said quietly. "No commands, no obligations, just choice." "What are you asking?" He took a breath, and she saw vulnerability in his eyes. The same man who'd given her water when she expected pain, who'd positioned himself between her and danger, who'd broken her chains in front of the entire court. "I'm asking," he said, "if you would choose to stay. Not as cupbearer, not as protected property, but as—" He paused, searching for words. "As my partner, my equal, the person I trust more than anyone in this kingdom." Serena's heart thundered. "And if I say no?" "Then you're still free, still honored, still given everything you need to build whatever life you want, with my blessing and protection." His thumb brushed across her knuckles. "But I hope you'll say yes." She studied him. This king who'd learned to see the invisible, who'd shattered tradition to free the enslaved, who'd chosen vulnerability over power. "I have conditions," she said. Hope flickered in his eyes. "Name them." "I want a voice in the new council. I want to help rebuild the systems that broke people like me. I want to ensure this change lasts beyond your reign." "Done. And I want you to promise me something. Anything. That you'll never stop seeing me. Not as a symbol, not as a former slave who became something more, but as me, Serena, the girl who smelled poison and knocked a cup down and was terrified the entire time." His free hand cupped her face, gentle as a prayer. "I could never stop seeing you. You're the reason I see anything clearly at all." "Then yes," she whispered, "I choose you. I choose this. I choose us." The bond between them, the one that had trembled unnamed for so long, finally settled into place, not forced by biology or fate, but chosen deliberately, consciously, freely. He kissed her softly, reverently, like she was something precious he'd been afraid to break. She kissed him back, like he was worth every risk she'd taken. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing unsteadily, he rested his forehead against hers. "The council will have opinions about this," he murmured, Let them talk. She smiled. We've survived worse than gossip. We have, haven't we? Outside, the sun set over a kingdom in transformation. Inside, a king and the woman who'd saved him stood together. Not ruler and subject, not master and freed slave. Just two people who'd chosen each other. And that choice would reshape everything. And 6 months changed everything. The kingdom of Blackmore Vale transformed like a forest after fire. Scorched earth giving way to new growth, tender but resilient. The slave quarters were dismantled stone by stone, rebuilt into housing for free workers. The brand registry was burned publicly in the courtyard, its ashes scattered to the wind. The new council convened weekly, nobles seated beside former slaves, merchants alongside scholars. Every voice weighted equally in debates that shaped the realm's future. Serena sat among them, her opinions sought, her insights valued. The first time she'd spoken in council, her voice had shaken. Now it rang clear, confident, carrying the authority of someone who'd earned her place through courage rather than birthright. The northern villages need healers, she said, reviewing reports spread before her. Former slaves with medical training are willing to serve, but they need supplies and protection during travel. Granted, Hilary said immediately. Commander Thane, assign escorts. Treasury, allocate funds for medical supplies. He glanced at Serena, a slight smile playing at his lips. Anything else? The children, she continued. The ones freed from the estates. They need education, not just shelter. We should establish schools. Lord Bremen, one of the reformed nobles, nodded thoughtfully. My family's holdings include empty manor houses. We could convert them. Do it, Hilary approved. The council meeting continued, efficient and purposeful, nothing like the toxic gatherings of the old regime. When it finally adjourned, Hilary caught Serena's hand as the others filed out. Walk with me? She smiled. Always. They climbed to the eastern balcony, the same overlook where Hilary had once stood alone, surveying his kingdom with the wary distance of a man who trusted nothing. Now, Serena stood beside him, her hand in his, the evening breeze carrying the scent of spring flowers instead of fear. Do you remember the first time you stood here? She asked softly. I stood here often, always alone. He turned to face her, leaning against the stone railing. I told myself it was strategic, a vantage point to watch for threats, but truthfully, I was just isolated, by choice and by fear. And now I'm never alone. His thumb traced circles on her palm. Even when you're not physically beside me, I feel you. Your influence in every reformed law, your compassion in every freed person who finds their voice, your courage in every decision I make. Serena's eyes glistened. You give me too much credit. Impossible. He pulled her closer. You saved my life twice. Once from poison, once from becoming a tyrant who ruled through fear alone. I'd say I give you exactly the right amount. She laughed, the sound bright and unguarded. So different from the terrified girl who'd knocked a cup down half a year ago. I never thanked you, she said suddenly. For what? For seeing me. When I was invisible to everyone else, you looked. She reached up, touching his face. You didn't have to. You could have punished me, discarded me, forgotten me. But you chose to see. I couldn't not see you, he replied simply. You shattered every wall I'd built, one spilled cup, and suddenly I couldn't pretend the invisible didn't matter. Below them, the courtyard bustled with activity, people working, laughing, living without chains. The kingdom was healing, slowly but surely, built on foundations of choice instead of cruelty. There's something I've been meaning to ask, Hilary said, his tone shifting to something both nervous and determined. Serena raised an eyebrow. The Alpha King gets nervous? When it matters, yes. He took both her hands, his expression serious. The council has suggested, and I agree, that the kingdom needs a queen. Not a consort, not a decorative figurehead, a true partner in leadership. Her breath caught. I know we've been operating as partners already, he continued, but I want it formal, public, unquestionable. He squeezed her hands. Serena Clements, will you stand beside me? Not as the woman I freed, but as the queen this kingdom deserves. Tears spilled down her cheeks, but she was smiling. You're asking a former slave to be your queen. I'm asking the bravest person I know to share a crown she's already been wearing. His voice softened. What do you say? Yes. The word came out half laugh, half sob. Yes, of course yes. He kissed her as the sun set over Blackmoor Vale, painting the sky in golds and crimsons, a kingdom reborn, a future unwritten, a love that had started with instinct and grown into something unbreakable. When they finally pulled apart, Serena rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat, the same heart she'd saved that first night. We've come far from a spilled cup, she murmured. We have. He pressed a kiss to her hair. And we have farther still to go, eyed together. Together, she agreed. 3 months later, the coronation was witnessed by thousands. Serena Clements, former slave, healer's daughter, the woman who'd knocked a cup down and changed the fate of a kingdom, was crowned Queen of Blackmoor Vale, in a ceremony that broke every tradition. Former slaves stood in places of honor. Nobles who'd adapted to the new order celebrated alongside those they'd once considered property. And when Hilary placed the crown upon her head, the entire realm erupted in cheers. That night, as they stood together on the balcony once more, Serena looked out over the kingdom she would help lead. What are you thinking? Hilary asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. That I never meant to change anything, she said softly. I only meant to save a life. And look what you've built from that single act of courage. She turned in his embrace, her eyes bright. What we've built. He smiled, that rare, genuine smile he reserved only for her. What we've built, he agreed. The moon rose over Blackmoor Vale, silver and eternal, watching over a kingdom transformed, where love had been born from instinct, where power had been reshaped by courage, where a slave's trembling hand had knocked down a cup and raised up a crown. They said the Alpha King never noticed slaves. They said if an Omega stumbled near his table, she would be punished. But when Serena Clements saved Hilary Castillo's life, everything changed. Sometimes the smallest acts echo loudest. Sometimes courage wears chains before it wears a crown. And sometimes to love begins with a single choice, to act when fear demands silence. The end. If this tale of courage and transformation stirred something in your heart, share your thoughts below and subscribe for more stories.